Super Bowl has just ended, and I think given some valuable insights to what the Texans can do to get to that Eagles level. How were the Eagles able to affect the Chiefs, and how can the Texans learn from that and implement it? This is the Texans Better Talk Show. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more daily Texans content. Look, I'm going to go through position groups, and I'm going to try to figure out how the Texans can meet that Eagles standard that they just set. Eagles probably had one of, if not the best rosters ever at the Super Bowl, I would imagine. You were able to make that great Kansas City team look pedestrian. So let's start where it started in this Super Bowl with their defensive line. I'm sure you've heard it. Vic Fangio blitzed 0 times in the first half. He only blitzed a couple of times once the game was already over and the backups were in, end of the third quarter. They were able to get pressure on Mahomes with 4 pass rushers. Now, this is something that DeMeco Ryans has wanted to do. When I'm watching the Eagles put pressure on Mahomes with 4 big defensive linemen that they're swapping out to keep fresh, the only thing I'm thinking is, hey, this is exactly what DeMeco Ryans wants to do with this Texans defensive line. That's why we got Denico Autry. We have so many rotational D tackles, Fatukasi, Mario Edwards, Will Anderson, Daniil Hunter. We are trying to build that great D line that the Eagles have. And look, I'm not going to lie to you. The Eagles have Jalen Carter, one of a renowned, really great defensive tackle. I don't think their edge rushers are better than Hunter and Will Anderson. Obviously, they played a career night, a masterpiece, from a defensive line point of view. I understand that. But I really think that the vision DeMeco Ryans has is the exact same vision that Vic Fangio had. And I'm not going to break any news here. Obviously, you rush 4, you get to the quarterback, good things happen. But that is what DeMeco Ryans, that's what his vision has been for this defense the whole season. You've heard him say, and throughout his career with the Texans, you've heard him say, we want this defensive line to be the ones where this whole thing starts at. It starts with the defensive line. How many times have you seen that? And I'm really bought in now just after seeing what the Eagles were able to do with their defensive line and the fact that I would argue we have better edge talent than the Eagles had. Obviously, we don't have a D tackle as good as Jalen Carter. I think Jalen Carter was able to manipulate a lot of those guys. But, credit to Sweat, credit to Hunter on the Eagles. Like, those guys were able to, they had career games, just legendary moments from them. But when you look at the roster construction and when you look at Sweat, Hunter, Daniil Hunter, Anderson, Jalen Carter, Fatukasi, Mario Edwards, you start to see that our defensive line, albeit did not play that well against the Chiefs when we played them in the divisional, you start to see what DeMeco Ryans' vision is and why this defensive unit can be so strong if you have a great defensive line. And so I guess I'll say that the Texans really need to keep focusing on that defensive line, learn from the Eagles, figure out how to get those guys to get pressure on Mahomes, because Mahomes looked pedestrian, he looked rattled in a way that I've never seen him look in a while. I mean, I would argue, yeah, against when he was playing Brady against the Bucks and he only put up 9 points. Yeah, he was getting pressured, but he had answers. He could scramble. He could run. There was balls that were dropped. I mean, he really looked clueless in this game and was able to throw back-to-back picks. So I guess my first thing would be continue that vision that DeMeco Ryans has on the defensive line and just get dogs on that defensive line. With a good line, it makes everything else easier. Now let's talk about the other aspect of the defense, the guys in coverage. And now let me get this straight. Or when you only have to rush 4 and you're getting pressure and you can drop 7 guys into coverage, like, yeah, you're going to take away passing lanes. It's going to be extremely hard for Mahomes to throw the ball. I think our secondary matches up pretty well with the Eagles secondary. I mean, they have Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean. We have Derek Stingley, Kamari Lassiter. I think Derek Stingley is the best corner out of those 4. I think Kamari Lassiter is playing just as well as Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell were. Like, again, this secondary comparison is pretty solid. I understand we have Eric Murray starting at the safety position, but I mean, when fully healthy with Jimmy Ward, Jalen Petrie, I mean, our secondaries, I think, align pretty well as well. And our linebacking unit, too, I think they match up pretty well. So I don't think our Texans defense was as far away from the Eagles defense, and I know that's a weird comparison to make since they didn't play as well against the Chiefs, but I really think that the vision is there. And I'm completely bought into what DeMeco Ryans is trying to do to transform this defense. When you look at our solid corners, when you look at our D-line, and you look at our safeties as well, like, the vision's definitely there. Moving on to the offensive side of the ball, I want to talk about the Jalen Hurts and CJ Stroud combo. And before I say anything, let me just say this. Mahomes was pressured 38.1% of the times he dropped back in this Super Bowl. Stroud has been pressured 39% on average this whole season. Stroud was pressured 51% of dropbacks in the divisional. So there was a more likely chance than not that on a drop back, Stroud would have been pressured, which is an absolute insane stat. Now, I'll give Mahomes this. I'll give Mahomes the fact that he was getting pressured with only 4 guys, right? Some of those pressures from Stroud came from all-out blitzes from Spagnuolo, weakening the secondary for maybe a hot read, a quick throw. But so I'll give Mahomes that. But still, 38% to 51% in the divisional, like, that's not something to scoff at. And so I guess another thing I got out of this game was Stroud has been having to put up with 39% pressure rates, 51% pressure rates in huge games. Of course, he's not going to play well. And I would argue Stroud played better in the divisional round than Mahomes played in the Super Bowl. And I get it. Eagles only had to rush 4. Stroud had less people to look at in the secondary, less defenders. I understand that. But the point I'm trying to make is good quarterbacks are going to look worse when you pressure them. And to make Mahomes look like that, I almost feel like I can even further restore my faith in CJ Stroud when you realize that this line has been so awful to him. And to see one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, have that performance while getting pressured, it's like, wait, I'm watching the game and I'm like, this looks exactly like what I saw Stroud go through. This is exactly what Stroud went through against the Chiefs, is what Mahomes is going through now. In my head, I'm like, wow, Stroud handled that better, in my opinion. And I think, in all honesty, I think Stroud had just gotten used to pressure. I don't think Mahomes, that was the most Mahomes has ever been sacked. It was the most pressure Mahomes had ever received in a game of that caliber. And Stroud goes up to the divisional in Arrowhead. He's like, all right, I've been sacked 8 times, been pressured 51%, is what it is. Like, let's play. There's some things to like about Stroud. Ultimately, you didn't get the win, but I mean, man, when you're dealing with that amount of pressure, I thought Stroud handled the pressure much better. And so again, that's kind of the Mahomes comparison of it. But even if you want to compare Stroud to Hurts, Hurts is not the best player on his team. Saquon Barkley is. Now, granted, once the Chiefs stopped Saquon Barkley, Hurts was able to make the throws he needed to make. I think if you swap Jalen Hurts with CJ Stroud in that Super Bowl, I think they still win. I mean, you would think they would still win, just utter domination with that defense. And even if your opinion of CJ Stroud isn't that he's a superstar, he's a top 5, potential to be a top 5 quarterback in the league, there's no telling me, you can't tell me that Stroud can do what Hurts did. And I think the only things Hurts really did in the Super Bowl that Stroud maybe couldn't have done, had limitations on, is some of the rushes, right? Recognizing the all-out blitz and running up the middle. Jalen Hurts did that several times, picking up like 17 yards on one run. But at the same time, we've also seen Stroud do that too against the Chargers. So I guess what I'm trying to say is Stroud handled pressure better than Mahomes did in the divisional when Mahomes was in this Super Bowl. And he's done everything Hurts has done. Like, you have to have faith in Stroud. And I think Stroud has more ceiling than Hurts. That's my opinion. Obviously, Hurts is surrounded by the better team. And so now I've kind of got your hopes up. I've kind of told you, well, we're close on the D-line. We're close on the secondary. Our quarterback's been through a lot, and he's close to what he could probably do what Hurts just did. So now let's talk about the real separators of where this Eagles team really breaks away from this Houston Texans team. The first one is going to be the biggest one. That's the offensive line. I mean, the graphic they showed about the Eagles' offensive line, their average weight and height being 6'6" and 340. I mean, dude, the secret to having a good O-line might just be draft the biggest, motherfucker in the draft. Like, really just put the biggest dude you can on the line, because, like, I don't know how you don't watch that game as a Texans fan and you go, you know what, yeah, we need O-line in the first round. I mean, come on. Like, when you have the best offensive line in football, just the amount of time you're able to give the passing quarterback, the amount of time, and I know their run game wasn't great, but we know historically Saquon has been phenomenal this whole season, and I really attribute that to Spags' excellent run-stopping defense. So, I mean, this O-line is just completely on a whole other nuclear level than the Texans. I would pay to see what our divisional game against KC would have been like if we had the Eagles line instead of our line. And that's going to be something we're going to have to work to fix. I'm all for drafting an offensive lineman in the first round. I know a lot of people aren't. That game, I think, cemented that in my head to where I want an offensive lineman. I understand the value things of the position, but give me a blue chip offensive lineman that'll be a guard for 10 years and that'll protect Stroud for 10 years, because that's really what I think I feel. Again, the offensive line definitely the biggest difference maker when you're comparing the Eagles to the Texans, and the Eagles' success to the Texans' brief success to mild to no success if you're talking about Super Bowl appearances and things like that. So, and then the next thing I'll kind of throw out there is the skill positions. So we'll start with the running backs. Look, I don't think Joe Mixon is like way below Saquon Barkley, right? It's not like we're comparing Eagles offensive line, Texans offensive line. It's like Saquon and it's like Joe Mixon. Like there's definitely a tier of a difference, but Saquon was he couldn't get much going against the Chiefs, against that run defense. Joe Mixon had a better game against the Chiefs defense than Saquon Barkley did. Obviously, that didn't last because we got into such obvious passing situations towards the end of the game, but Joe Mixon, I thought, ran the ball pretty well against the Chiefs. I'm not going to say flat out better than Saquon. I do think maybe a little bit better than Saquon, but like the running back position, might not matter as much to some people. I think this season's really changed that, but we have a bell cow running back in Joe Mixon. I guess that's what my point is. Like, I understand Saquon's probably more talented and just better instincts at the position, but Joe Mixon is a bell cow. Like, the positions are there. So it's really just, and then when you factor in the bad offensive line play, like, I wonder what Joe Mixon would look like with a good offensive line, with an Eagles offensive line. So that's one position. Now let's talk about the wide receivers. Yeah, this isn't really close, right? You've got Nico Collins, who I would argue is better than A.J. Brown and who's better than Devonta Smith. I would argue that. You've got Nico and the wide receivers. And moving on to the wide receivers, you've got Nico Collins, who's better than Devonta Smith and better than A.J. Brown. I would argue that. I would argue that if you took the Eagles receivers and the Texans receivers, Nico Collins is the best receiver in that room. The problem is there is such a huge fall off after Nico Collins due to not having Diggs, not having Dell, that I just don't know. Like, it's so obvious to me that wide receiver 2 is such a huge drop off when you've got Devonta Smith as your number 2, or if you consider A.J. Brown to be your number 2. You've also got the first round, 16th round pick. He caught a touchdown that got called back at the 1 and they pushed. I'm forgetting his name, but you've got that guy who's a solid wide receiver 3, right? Made big catches. So, like, again, we have the number 1 receiver. We have our number 1 receiver. We need some more boost in that wide receiver 2. We really need that aspect of it. So, and again, to finally wrap this video up, the last position I'll talk about where I do think we're on a little bit lower of a plane than the Eagles would be the kicker. I mean, how many times did their kicker have to redo a kick from 5 yards back? And I'm sitting there at Elliott and I'm going, damn, dude, you're just unfazed, smiling, happy, redoing kicks, 5 yards back kick, 5 yards back kick, field goal, field goal, field goal, four field goals, really made like 6 of them, 7 field goals because he had to redo them. Like, I don't know if I trust Kaimi Fairbairn that much at all. And Kaimi kind of looks like he gets rattled and the conditions have to be perfect. But kind of just go over everything I've said. The Texans could be there on the D-line with the Eagles. Obviously, the Eagles had, and I'm not taking anything away from that, just a masterful, wonderful performance in the Super Bowl. I think our D-line could have been capable of that. They've done it before. Our quarterback, I don't think, is far off from Hurts. I mean, he performed better than Mahomes did under pressure. Yes, they were only rushing 4. Stroud wasn't always the case. I understand that, but didn't throw 2 picks, didn't throw a pick 6 in the divisional. And I'm confident that if you would have plucked Stroud to where Hurts was, maybe not the leadership maybe isn't there, but like he could have done what Hurts did. That's all I'm saying. The wide receivers, we have the best wide receiver out of the Eagles. Just that's it. Got to add more bodies there. Offensive line, not even close, not even on the same planet, same galaxy. So offensive line, shout out to the Eagles. Great offensive line, best in the league. But the secondary is kind of there too. Like, we have a lockdown corner. We have a really good second corner. When our nickel's not hurt, he's really good. Our safety position's a little weak, but I mean, it's not terrible. So that's kind of my analysis, is that the Texans are not too far away from where they want to go. And seeing Mahomes struggle that much has really given me kind of an upwards, like, hope and faithfulness in Stroud, because Stroud has handled pressure like that better. And it's probably because he's gone through this whole season getting so much pressure. So that's kind of my take on the Super Bowl. Let me know what you guys think. How close do you think we are to the Eagles? I will see y'all in the next one, man. Peace out.